The US dollar is about to be dethroned as the world's beloved risk-free asset. Welcome to the United States of America, where the classic political gridlock between the Democrats and Republicans will lead the great nation to default. The mother of all crises would cause the dollar to lose its long-enjoyed imperialism as the primary trading and reserved currency. In this video, we're breaking down the political context of the impending default, what historical government shutdowns tell us about the fate of the dollar, and why China is the emerging victor of the newest dollar crisis. Before we move on, subscribe to our channel for a detailed economic rundown of the world. Since the Second World War, the U.S. has upheld its currency as the shining sword, implicating bilateral trade agreements, swaying trade blocs, and imposing sanctions on those who dare to play with its loosely held rules. Now, as the country moves towards a default, the global financial system is entering uncharted territory. It's likely that the stock prices will plummet, and the dollar would lose its desirability in the international markets. Because, well, when the house is on fire, no one wants to risk taking a peek inside. But what is really perplexing is the very origin of the issue. Believe it or not, the heavy bipartisan political friction in the country is depriving the U.S. to borrow money from itself. The issue isn't exactly complex, and in a classic movie, its underpinnings are more political than economic. You see, ever since the Biden administration took over, beating Republicans fair and square, the House of Representatives is a mess. As it stands today, the House is a majority of Republican candidates who refuse to vote for increasing the debt ceiling. In the case the motion fails, the U.S. would default on its own debt payments and management. As per the Republican Party, Joe Biden spent more than he could ever afford to. His COVID-19 relief budgets and welfare bills are expensive. But since human-centric and social spending is the face of the Democratic election campaign, cutting off the welfare budget would look terrible in front of their voters. And perhaps this is exactly what the Republicans want. So, the Reps Majority House, led by Speaker Kevin McCarthy, refuses to increase the country's self-imposed debt ceiling. They want Biden to slash budgets to avoid the country from getting a bad reputation in the global financial systems. Sure, this could be all avoided if the motion goes through, but again, Republicans don't want to set a bad precedent where presidents make up for their big splurges by increasing the federal limit of borrowing. Plus, Biden's downfall is their big win that could potentially lead to more political affinity in the upcoming midterm elections. If the Biden-McCarthy negotiations fail, a Democratic government would be defaulting. And that really doesn't help in sweeping the public approval, which is already shaky considering the rising inflation in the country. Yet certain experts don't seem too bothered by the political gridlock and its implications on the US dollar, mainly because we've seen this film before and the ending wasn't bad. Or let's just say it wasn't disastrous by all means. First things first. Government shutdowns are bad for the U.S. economy, and we have a series of historical evidence to back this claim up. So, it was almost baffling when Donald Trump, the Republican candidate for the 2024 presidential race, suggested that his party should run Biden towards a default. A quick glance into history would tell us that the biggest government shutdown in U.S. history is actually Trump's legacy. But that instance could be written off because the dollar had a safe and sound reputation in the international markets. Plus, considering the current political gridlock, it makes more sense to study the instances from Obama's administration back in 2011. During that period, the situation was almost the same. The Dems and GOP couldn't come to terms to increase the debt ceiling on time. Throughout that process, the U.S. lost a lot of credibility in the eyes of credit rating agencies. In a historical event, the country lost a significant credit rating for the first time ever, and by the third quarter, its stock had plummeted by 15%. Past debt limit impasses show us that it's quite dangerous to bring the country on the verge of default. Historically, U.S. governments and their legislation have waited till the 11th hour to either suspend or increase the debt limit. While they bicker and sip coffee during numerous roundtable conferences, the economy suffers. The Obama incident is the biggest proof of that, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Sure, it's not impossible for the U.S. to improve its credit rating to regain the interest of its focal, deep pockets investors. However, even in this ideal scenario, we can't ignore the short-term consequences that taxpayers have to suffer. The debt ceiling impasse raises borrowing costs for the taxpayers, and optically, the US dollar looks weak and inherently unprofitable. The increasing cost of money is profoundly bothersome for small-scale investors who are looking for risk-free assets. And despite sitting on the throne of the reserved currency, the dollar isn't exactly risk-free now. If a government shutdown can't testify to that, the 2008 economic meltdown surely can. So, the overarching implications of the default will perhaps start a new epoch in history. For the first time ever, the dollar is falling into the category of a risky asset. Previously, the U.S. Treasury bonds were considered to be risk-free, meaning the investors would have a guaranteed return with zero chances of any risks or potential instability. The dollar isn't the same safe haven anymore. What really undermines the confidence of the dollar is the pitfall that the U.S. government will suffer, and honestly, it's a big public embarrassment. In the months to come, if the motion doesn't go through with the GOP vote, the government will have no money to follow suit with its lucrative expenditures. In all terms, the Biden administration will be broke. But more importantly, for its future borrowing, the U.S. Treasury would have to pay hefty amounts in interest, potentially losing more money and adding on to its already piling debt. So, yeah, it's a never-ending cycle. On a micro level, common people will also suffer. The debt ceiling impasse means that Biden would have to actively stop spending on the public sector. Teachers, veterans, healthcare providers, and people relying on state welfare would suffer the most. A brief default would cause the economy to lose out on 500,000 jobs. And a protracted default means that the GDP would go down by 6%, almost replicating the rippling impacts of the 2008 crisis. And this time, the US might not get off easy. Enjoying a complete context-driven analysis of economic meltdowns? Subscribe to our channel for more content like this. In the 2011 government shutdown, Obama's debt impasse had a very counterintuitive impact. Despite the warning signs by the finance experts, the dollar did not lose its value in the global financial markets. Needless to say, some GOP-leaning experts hope for the same fate for their beloved currency even today. According to them, they've heard the song before, so they know how it ends. Apparently, a shift in risk assets will benefit the dollar. And since the status quo protects the currency as the main trading instrument, investors and other trading blocs have no option but to buy dollars to carry out their bustling business. But we tell you that the 2011 instance couldn't be more different than the 2023 standing of the dollar. Back in Obama's time, the dollar wasn't under threat from the de-dollarization efforts from China, Russia, Latin America, India, and Saudi Arabia. In this scenario, the global reserve currency is a playground bully who's finally being cornered by its victims. Even before the political gridlock that'll most likely jeopardize the global standing of the currency, the bloc led by China was making aggressive moves to undermine the dollar. The superpower in the East brokered peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And soon enough, Mohammed bin Salman was hunting for non-dollar mechanisms to trade his company's liquid gold, aka oil. Of course, their most lucrative option was the Chinese yuan, which has been gaining momentum in the trading markets. For instance, America's big trading partners like Brazil have already opted for yuan to carry out their business, hurting its long-standing alliance with the US. Simultaneously, the countries that have been crushed under US-led sanctions also rattled to look for their options to sideline the dollar. In such efforts, Russia and Iran were quite forthcoming to endorse the Chinese yuan as the potential alternative reserved currency. So, if the US defaults, China has the golden opportunity to galvanize its de-dollarization efforts. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has played with the narrative that the dollar isn't as risk-free as it is. After the 2008 financial crisis, China was proven mostly right. And in the months to come, we can see that the insecure dollar would result in falling stock prices and rising interest rates, two things that investors highly dislike. As the currency becomes a non-risk-free asset in the global financial market, other currencies will race to make up for their losing value against the dollar. The Japanese yen, Russian ruble, and Chinese yuan would be at the forefront of gaining some stability for their respective currencies. All in all, the US dollar is transcending into a disastrous epoch of its golden run. While the country suffers politically and economically, China is making some big winning bets. Enjoyed the complete analysis of the US debt ceiling impasse? Give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more informative content.